Welcome to, welcome to the Interschool Council and Lower Merion School District's presentation. This is our November Parent Education Series. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Cicely Reese. Robin Jory and I work together representing the Interschool Council. Did I mispronounce your name, Robin?
It's Carey.
Gowrie, sorry. Robin and I work together representing the Interschool Council, which we abbreviate as the ISC. The ISC is the umbrella organization for the 11 home and school associations for the Lower Merion School District schools. The ISC works in conjunction with Megan Schaefer, our acting superintendent of the Lower Merion School District, to plan and host the Parent Education Series, which we tend to abbreviate to Parent Ed Series. Before we get started this evening, I need to review a few housekeeping items. First, I want to let everybody know that this presentation is being recorded. We have found that this isn't always the most opportune time for everybody, for families, etc. So this presentation is recorded so that other members of our school district are able to view it at a later date. You'll be able to find this along with other recordings of past events from the Parent Ed series on the Student Services Department page of the Lower Merion School District website. As the event is being recorded and with respect for our speakers, please do not audio or video record the presentation. After our speakers have concluded their presentation, we will open the event up for Q&A. During this time, we ask that you not include any personal information as this is a public forum and we wish to respect your privacy. You may have the opportunity to raise your hand, but you definitely can submit any questions that you have via the chat directly to the speakers and to Robin and I, and we will make sure that the speakers get your question and it will be answered or will be asked anonymously. So for now, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our speakers this evening. They join us from the University of Pennsylvania's Carey Law School, and they represent Penn's Financial Literacy Project, abbreviated FLP. And our speakers this evening are Samut Kumar, Lindsay Harungo, Elize Saeed, and Jude Suvak. I apologize for mispronouncing any names, but we are super excited to have you. And I'd like to turn it over to our speakers. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Everyone here from Penn, we're excited to be giving this presentation today, and hopefully you all find this useful. So I guess just to get started with, the big picture theme is kind of like financial wellness for teenagers, and kind of we want to distill that into a few easy ways to kind of understand kind of the in the weeds of what this looks like, but then also how to make this kind of digestible and easy to communicate, and have this be something that teenagers can pick up on and learn and start to become interested in. So getting started then diving into the presentation, if we flip over to the first slide. So I guess three big areas which we're planning to focus on today. The first one is creating a budget. And so the reason why this part is important is to really look at financial planning as first coming up with an idea of what you have, whether it's income sources, how much money you're making, how much you're spending, and then this is the kind of the planning phase, and where it's really easy to build skills and good best practices, and that's somewhere starting at an early age, learning how it goes can be pretty useful. So we're going to dive into some of the best techniques there, things we think are easy to implement, and then you could kind of layer on top of that ways to refine your budgeting practices further. Then the second phase is really focusing on saving, where once you kind of have your initial roadmap of money coming in, money where you're spending, then you can start to kind of implement a bit more of a long-term vision. This is where kind of your potential goals and things you want to do in the future come into play. And so what we're talking about there really gets into how you start to come up with these ideas, and then create a plan for yourself to get there in the future. And then the last piece is building credits. This part is a little more unique, where especially for young people, where there's a lot of benefits that come down the road, to having relationships with banks and other financial lenders, and that's anything from like having a credit card to eventually borrowing for houses or cars, etc. But oftentimes that's hard to think about in the present, and so I think a bit of a focus on that, understanding what's relevant to younger people, is also a really important topic. So we're going to go through all these three areas, and hopefully within them, you kind of find some actionable steps. Like what some of the best practices are, but then also what are easy ways to kind of explain this to someone young who's not too familiar with these concepts. All right, so diving into the next slide then. Yeah, just to kind of frame what we're talking tonight, I think something that's important to communicate to teenagers, young people, is why this entire topic is important, because oftentimes it can seem a bit boring having to learn something new, and there's like numbers involved, and it can be overwhelming and stressful. But I think first off, emphasizing that it's really a lifelong skill that you're learning, like no matter what kind of job you work, what you're doing in life, where you're living, this is something that's fundamental. So starting early helps kind of make your life down the road easier. It's no different than kind of going to the gym or doing something else where you're kind of getting yourself in good shape. The second piece I think that's also very enticing to young people is like the independence part. So as soon as you start, getting your first job, you're working in some capacity. If you're able to manage your finances, then you can start to become the owner of your life. You're not reliant on other people in your family or community, and you can really benefit from that. I think that's something always very appealing to young people. And then kind of coupled with that, the last part really is the future planning and goals, which we'll talk about, where everyone has these big ideas, whether they want to go to college, buy a car, or travel, do various things. And so all of that becomes realistic if you kind of have the foundation of financial planning. So that's why this is all important. And hopefully once we get into the meat of this presentation, there's good takeaways you all can bring with you to explain to your children. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alize, who is starting with budgeting.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the first step of this financial well-being and starting early for teenagers in terms of their financing is the budgeting. So the first step for budgeting is most naturally you need to determine where your money is coming from. And now the sources could vary from students to students, and you need to determine where you're getting money every month or yearly or weekly. So for example, some sources you might be eligible for some government allowances or some other allowances from your school or education institution. Second could be pocket money from your parents or anywhere or anyone else. You can perhaps get some one-off gifts or some regular gifts. Increasingly, students and younger teenagers have started opening bank accounts, which might be saving accounts, and then you earn interest for them. So that is also another source of income. And then, of course, high school students also do student jobs or internships or volunteerships that might be paid, so they get money from there. Of course, there with the advent of technology and other money, saving techniques, there's Zelle, there are a couple of other apps that you can store money from. So as the first step, you need to determine all sources of income. Next slide, please. Okay, and once you've identified the different sources of your income, the next step is that you need to determine your fixed and variable expenses, or in other words, needs and wants. So fixed expenses, as the name suggests, are expenses that you cannot avoid. These can be as like a car loan, or a cell phone bill that you might be using, and you need to pay your obligation. These are something that you cannot opt out of. On the opposite end, there are variable expenses that you're not obliged to pay every month. For example, as they're very discretionary, as the name suggests. So perhaps going to a concert or going to the mall, these are expenses that might not occur every month, and you can easily avoid them. So first step is to identify fixed/variable expenses. The second is, of course, needs. You need to go to buy grocery, or you need to, or perhaps there is a need that is arising of paying car repair bills, or you need to do some after school sports practice, basketball practice, and you need to put in some money for that. So those are needs that you encounter. And second of all, wants could be as varied as getting a new phone or purchasing some expensive items. So the second step is to identify different types of expenses and needs and wants. Moving ahead. The third, once you've identified your fixed expenses and your variable expenses, the third step is to budget your expenses, and in terms budget your spending. So the most common rule that is followed, and that is the most recommended and most efficient way of money spending, keeping in mind the saving goals or any other financial goals that you might encounter, or any contingency goals that you have to keep an eye out. The rule is 50, 30, and 20 rule. 50% goes into your fixed expenses or needs, 30% goes into your variable or expenses or wants, and 20% goes into your savings. So while doing this, you need to keep in mind your priorities can change with time, within a couple of years or months or whatever is going on specifically in your life. Some trip is coming up, you need to save for it, so on and so forth. Maybe you have to sit for the SAT, you have to do lots of practice for it, you might have to save up, and so on and so forth. I'll just also show an example. Next slide, please. Example of how to calculate your budget according to this rule. So for instance, if you have $200 from all possible sources of income, as explained and discussed before, bank accounts, pocket money, Zelle, cash in hand, gifts, etc. So if you have $200 as your income, so you need to identify and categorize that income into two classes, the first being the needs, the second wants, and the third is savings. So naturally, if you do the math, 50%, $100 go to, for example, I've just pinned down some common examples of needs that may arise for students, for high school students. For example, a car mortgage, $60 that might go into it. A phone bill, that might be a need, that if you have a phone, and any repair of the cars that you might have. Second, wants, there might be you need to do shopping, so $35 go to that, and movies, going out with friends, $25, and then that leaves with $20 that just goes into savings. And even in that saving category, you can further divide it into emergency funds that you will not be using anytime soon, but for a later date, and savings that are more immediate in nature. So this is how you calculate your budget and your income. Moving ahead, please. And then the next step comes, of course, that once you are keeping track, you need to keep track of your expenses. So most common methods would also be, you can do it manually, or you can do it online, or make Excel sheets, or do it like manually, create sheets where you put in your income or your expenses. And you can also determine how frequent you want to keep a record of your expenses. These could also be weekly, monthly, or bi-weekly, or bi-monthly. So depending on how frequent you want to keep a record of it. And of course, you need to keep the record in front of you, that is approachable, and it kind of reminds you of the saving goals that you have, and the income that you have. So this is kind of like an overview of how budgeting really should be started or carried once you are in your high school, and if you want to really start early in terms of budgeting and how you want to be financially independent, as my colleague mentioned. The earlier you start, the more you kind of get the confidence and the independence to in terms of your finances and spending. Moving ahead, I've also jotted down some budgeting tools that are most frequently used and preferred by students and parents, of course. So for spreadsheets, these are two different kind of apps that are most commonly used. They have different tools in them. You can just input your numbers and it will automatically calculate your budget in terms of the 50, 30, and 20 rule, or any other mathematical division that you want to do in terms of your income. And so the most common is Rocket Money if you're a laptop user, Simplify if you're a mobile phone user, and then generally some different other trackers and websites that might be useful for you. And of course, high school students might vary in terms of age, in terms of experience. So in order to inculcate this the budgeting ability and this habit, you can always engage the students in some fun activities that they're most likely to understand through the whole concept of budgeting and saving. Now I'll hand it over to my colleague, who will take it from there. And these are the sources from where we got all the information. So.
Thank you very much for that. My name is Jude Suvak, and I'm here to talk specifically about the savings aspect. So in our beginner's guide to savings, what we are going to focus on are establishing the purposes of a savings account so that that's easily able to be communicated, and what savings can do for your child moving into the future. So first, on the purposes of a savings account. A savings account is used for emergencies. So the difference between savings and checking that you can communicate to your child in a way that they can understand is that these are for things that are not going to be happening every day. A checking account or a debit card focus would be used for the more routine expenses, whereas the savings account is used for either expenses that are large and abnormal or emergencies, so something that you're not necessarily anticipating. Further, a savings account is useful to provide for safe growth as opposed to other investment strategies which might carry more risk. So rather than talking about other popular means of growing your money, such as investing in a stock or something, a savings account insured by the FDIC is a very reliable means to grow your money, even if it's at a slightly smaller rate than you might get from another growth strategy. So in order to communicate the importance of savings, because something that I definitely had a consideration of as a teenager is, well, why do I need to save money? I'm only 15. So two big things to keep in mind are the role of a savings cushion, as has been touched upon by some of my colleagues and me just previously. These are for abnormal expenses. So something that I definitely was not considering that happened to me once is that I was lucky enough to have a car and I was paying for part of my car payment and whatnot, and I had factored that in. And one day I drove over a gravel road and popped all 4 tires and had to suddenly found myself $800 of debt for those 4 tires that I was not planning for. So without a savings cushion, I would have had to have resorted to another method. But because I had that cushion, I was able to easily bounce back from that abnormal expense. The other major point is for interest accrual, which I'll touch more upon later, but it's something that I was not understanding of as a teenager that I think some young adults can struggle with as well, is that if your money is in a savings account or a similar tool, which we will discuss, your money grows without you having to touch it. Maybe not at astronomical rates, but any growth is good growth, as opposed to there were some of my peers that we ended up, tossing some jokes at because they had a cash job and all of their cash just sat in their wallet. Whereas if it had been deposited in the savings account, they could have been making some interest on that money. So moving into teenager-specific savings considerations, as adults in the room, I think a big focus is on saving for retirement or perhaps saving for a home or other sort of investments, but those considerations might not be as convincing to your children. So these are some topics that might be more relevant for their state of mind. One that definitely came to mind was in season versus out of season for sports or activities. Whether your child plays a sport, is in the band, or whatever they might do to use their time, these activities are often seasonal. So when you're planning for savings, your child might say, well, right now I'm working a job. So why do I need to focus on saving when I have cash flow available? And they might not be thinking or realizing that 3 months from now or 6 months from now, they won't be able to work as much or possibly at all if they're committing their time to this other extracurricular activity. So a part of the role of savings is building that cushion not only for abnormal expenses, but for times when they might not be able to work like they are in that present moment when you're having that conversation. Another consideration that's a classic that's been brought up by some of my other colleagues is a card purchase or a share expense on a card purchase, such as paying for car insurance. That's often a big symbol in American life, especially living in a suburban school district, that cars are important for getting around and transit. So that's often something that can be very salient for your teenager. Another thing, of course, is saving for college. Not only just in the sense as you are saving to pay down your tuition bill and minimizing your loans, although that is certainly something that would be positive with the way interest rates are or could possibly be in the future. But one thing that is notable is that most undergraduate institutions have work restrictions specifically for first year students, where they encourage students not to work at all during that first year, or if they do work, to work very minimal hours. So if your student is not taking that into account and building up a cushion in order to cover expenses that they might be doing on a regular basis, such as, just getting food out with some friends once a week or going to see a movie or whatnot, that's something that could cause a hiccup in their budget. And the last that is not so college centric is saving for moving out. Not all students want or go to college immediately afterwards, but most students do plan to move out within a few years of their graduation. And so rather than being so focused on a car or being focused on higher education, you could say, this is you saving up to get your own furniture or your own sets of silverware, things that when I was moving out, I was not necessarily anticipating, but my savings played a big role in helping me to cover. So this slide is about the magic of compound interest and the interest accrual that we had touched upon previously. There's an example to the right, just comparing someone who saves an equivalent amount of money that is sort of stored in your wallet or stored under the bed, as opposed to someone who made the same initial deposit and then just allowed their money to grow. There's the adage that I'm sure everyone's heard at some point, that time in the market is better than timing the market. Time is the most crucial factor in allowing for this interest accrual to work for you. So the sooner that someone starts saving is the sooner that their money starts working for them. And reminding your child of this, saying that even if they can only put 10, 20, $50 into a savings account a month, that will allow the interest on those deposits to accrue so that that grows on their own without them having to deposit anymore and still essentially getting paid for having their money being put to work. Another factor is that I have touched upon, but want to come out and say outright that your young adult may not understand, is that the interest earned does earn further interest. That is what the compound interest entails. So while they might think, okay, I understand that if I deposit $1,000, then I might earn $10 of interest. What they might not understand is that in that following period, even if there's no further deposit, they're earning interest on the initial principal as well as that interest, which continues to build. And that's really where the magic of compound interest comes into play. So just trying to instill the time for their money to work for them into your young adult can be very beneficial to their financial future. So another key consideration is setting achievable savings goals. Something that I'm sure that you've heard before, it's not a secret, is the power of goal setting and the sort of power of the positive psychology of saying that I'm going to set aside X amount of dollars every month. rather than setting, okay, I'm going to save for my future or I'm going to save for college. Rather than having sort of lofty but non-specific goals, it is more helpful, and it has been shown that we as human beings just enjoy having a hard set goal that we can work towards as opposed to something that is more abstract. So developing a target to work towards can help your child stay motivated to reach that goal. A goal that is often recommended by experts is the 3 months expenses target, which is a traditionally recommended minimum safety net. Now, if your child is only able to work part-time while they're still in high school, or they're relying mostly on sort of offhand jobs, this might take longer than it would if they were, older or working full-time. But it's still a tangible goal that is achievable, that everyone can work towards and is very possible. So while it might be just as specific as a goal to say, I want to save up for a down payment on a house, that might not be as possible as saying, I want to cover 3 months of my expenses. And keeping those attainable, achievable goals in mind will drive the ability to actually attain them. Another idea is just the idea of paying your future self as sort of the psychology or mindset shift to work away from the abstract ideas to something that they can understand right now. Is that when you're trying to convince a young adult or a teenager to set aside money when they might not desire to do so on their own volition, one way that you can describe it is saying that, yeah, you're essentially putting money aside for the Jude of tomorrow, or the tomorrow of insert your child's name here, so that it's not working towards something that is distant or just numbers on a computer in reflecting a savings account, but that they're actively thinking about it as in a way of, okay, I'm doing this work today so that I have it a little bit easier tomorrow. So having established why a savings account or a saving strategies are important, we now move to recommended savings tools on how to actually achieve these things. So something that has been very helpful that's suggested for young adults are roundup applications. So this is especially prominent for young adults who say, okay, I'm committed to saving, but I might be a little bit forgetful, or I have work and then practice and then still have to find time to sleep. So how am I going to actually do this? What Roundup applications, such as Acorns and others, do is whenever your child makes a purchase with their card, if for say the purchase was $99.99, that 1 cent will be rounded up and automatically deposited. And while that might not sound like very much initially, if it's with every purchase, it is a relatively minimal deduction compared to what they're already spending, but it adds up over time. Another consideration that goes beyond just a normal savings account are certificates of deposits and bonds, which notably you would have to purchase with your child. Minors cannot purchase them on their own, but they have very high certainty as sort of a trade-off for their low liquidity. And especially if your child is bound for college or believes that that is their path, there are often savings that you can purchase for 5, 6, 8 years so that you can say, okay, I'm going to insert this amount of money today, which I know will grow to Y dollar amount that I will be able to cash out when I graduate to save for, sort of the start of life expenses. So rather than just having a savings account, this could be a way to mix your saving strategy. And the final recommendation that I would pose are high yield savings accounts as opposed to solely using a traditional savings account. These offer moderate liquidity, but great interest. These accounts are FDIC insured and they are through banks, but not through traditional brick and mortar banks. They're usually offered more by online banks, although that's currently an expansion in the market. But essentially what these savings accounts do is that they offer a higher rate of interest because the company is saving costs elsewhere. But to you, the consumer, there is little to no drawback from a traditional savings account to a high yield savings account. but instead of earning maybe 0.5 or 1% interest, often these accounts can offer 4, 4.5, even 5% interest, whereas you face the same minimal restrictions of maybe 5 withdrawals a month. And as we have talked about, with the purpose of savings being for abnormal expenses or large expenses as opposed to everyday purchases, that shouldn't be a problem even for your young adult. So to wrap up our savings section, we're going to go over our savings takeaways. Savings are for emergencies or abnormal large purchases. Savings accounts are not for everyday use. Beginning to save early gives time for interest to accrue and your money to work for itself, gaining money on money that you've already deposited without any further effort on your own part. Setting goals is important for motivation and tracking, so that rather than working solely towards large abstract ideals, you're working towards attainable, achievable goals that you can then set, attain, and then set again. And high yield savings accounts are currently a very lucrative way where you can earn higher interest than might be offered through other savings tools at no further risk. And attached in this slide are links to savings resources, both with teaching strategies, recommended Roundup apps, and recommended high yield savings account for you to instruct your child about. Thank you for your time, and I will pass it off to my following presenter.
I'm Lindsay, and I'm talking about building credit. So I guess to get started, why does building credit matter? So your credit score is a reflection of your relationship with financial institutions and how safe of a bet you are for them. So if they loan you money, how likely they think you are to pay that money back. So this relationship impacts all sorts of purchases. Um, Anything you take a loan out for, so car loans, mortgages, are related to your credit score. In addition, it affects what credit cards you are eligible for. And ultimately, you want low interest rates because a lower interest rate leads to a lower overall cost of whatever item you're purchasing. In addition to purchasing power, interest rates or your credit score will also come up in things like apartment applications. So if you're trying to lease a new place, that apartment building wants to know that you can consistently make payments, and one indication of that is your credit score. And it also sometimes comes up on job applications. Jobs want to know that you're responsible and fiscally aware, and one way that they can check that is through your credit score. But there's no reason to worry. Most young adults don't have extensive credit when they first move out on their own. They will have time to build credit. There's no reason to worry about not having credit as a high schooler right now. And next slide, yeah. So one consideration for your teenager, if you want to start helping them build credit, is whether they should have a debit card or a credit card. So most teens have debit cards, but debit cards don't help build your credit score, or in general don't help build your credit score. And this is because they pull money directly from your bank account, so you are not taking out any lines of credit, and you can't draw more than you have to pay. They also generally have less protection for consumer fraud, as that's set by the bank, whereas most credit cards have consumer fraud protections that are that will protect you. Like if someone steals your credit card and starts withdrawing money, they won't force you to pay that money back. So credit cards are essentially a small loan that you pay off every month, and that starts to build that relationship with the credit agencies and the financial institutions, showing that you can consistently pay off what you spend and that you're a reliable consumer. Next slide, please. Okay, so you have, as a teenager, limited options for building credit. You're probably not paying your own rent. You probably don't have a lot of loans, but that's okay. you can still start to build that relationship. So most teenagers probably aren't eligible for their own credit card, but if you add your kids as an authorized user on your credit card or a new credit card, that can help build credit. Just be sure to call your credit card company to ensure that they're reporting your teenagers' credit to the credit bureaus. There are also some debit cards that report to the credit bureaus, but they're harder to find, so you'll have to check with your individual bank if they have an option for that. In addition, a lot of building credit is just understanding financial literacy. So as we talked about earlier in this presentation, you need to be aware of how much you're spending and how you can pay off everything that you spend. So it's important for your kids to know that credit cards can lead to debt. So they need to be responsible about spending and make sure they have a budget and they can pay off everything they spend. In addition, with a credit card, it's important to check what you're spending every month. Make sure that there's no one stealing your credit card number, no fraudulent charges, and talk with them about how to report this to the credit card company so that they don't build up charges for things that they're not even buying. And then also, a good way to help kids learn at first is to keep limits low so they can only build up so much debt at a time. But also keep in mind that the closer you are to your credit limit, the worse it looks for your credit score. So you want to keep them low, but not so low that your kid is hitting them constantly. And then always pay your bills in full. Most credit cards will have an option for a minimum payment, but that minimum payment then forces you to pay interest on the rest of the balance, and that can lead to a rapidly increasing balance that becomes hard to pay off. And then the final option for building credit that we wanted to recommend is secured credit cards. So these work the same as a normal credit card, except for they're backed by a security deposit. This makes it more likely that someone with little or no credit will be approved, so they're a good option for teenagers. As your teen builds credit, that deposit will be refunded in full. It will also be refunded in full if the teenager closes the account and no longer wants to use the card. They are different from debit or prepaid cards because you are taking out a line of credit. You can spend beyond your deposit. And everything you spend is reported to the credit bureaus. They're offered by a number of banks and credit card companies, but be aware that sometimes they come with high fees and high interest rates. So it might be worthwhile to shop around and see both what your bank offers or maybe some competing banks offer. And then the other important thing is that secured credit cards offer the same fraud protections as a regular credit card. So if for any reason the card is lost or stolen, it won't impact your teen's budget. And these are just some sources for where the information came from and a few options for secured credit cards.
And to wrap things up, then just zoom out a bit, and so I guess you've kind of gone through kind of the details from the budgeting process to savings and finally building credit. And kind of a lot of this can be dense, and especially when you're explaining it to a teenager, it can take time to go through all this and start building these concepts over time. But what we kind of want to leave you with is kind of emphasizing the importance of starting early. And this is something that teachers can take away for themselves too, where the earlier they start learning how this works and kind of dabbling, it doesn't need to happen overnight. It can go a long way. And then kind of the incentive to do it is that by learning how to manage their finances, people can become financially independent and start to make their own decisions. Especially teenagers can start to develop their medium term and longer term goals. And we've kind of gone in depth over various examples, but this is kind of a important way for them to start taking ownership and then playing towards achieving goals in the future. And then all of this kind of feeds into, as you transition from kind of the high school age to whether it's going to college or working and kind of becoming an adult, to be able to have stable finances, and that kind of feeds into the rest of your life. And you want to start learning what are the best practices and avoid making common mistakes that can end up causing a lot of headaches for a lot of people. So that's where we'll leave it, and happy to turn it over to questions now if there are any.
Thank you so much, you guys. That was an awesome presentation. I kind of forgot that we're taping this, so I was like taking tons of notes, and there was one slide. I was like, can you stop and put that slide back? But then I remembered we actually posted. So thank you so much. It was a very thorough presentation. I really like the fact that you included resources and also that we can actually show our teenagers the presentation, because they will probably receive it a lot better coming from you because you are closer to their age, because at this point sometimes they think we don't know anything. But thank you so much for doing that. I'm going to turn it over to Robin to share some of the questions, but I do have one question, and about the high interest savings account. So I know that so it makes sense, but usually with the high interest savings accounts, what I have found is that you actually need to have a big pot of money to start that, to kind of qualify. And so I could be wrong. The other thing is, like the CDs, sometimes to get those really high rates, like the 5% or 5.5%, it has to be a big chunk of money, and you can't use it like a money market account where you can take money out. It has to stay in there for a long period of time. Do you have do any of your sources include places where you can actually utilize their services and you don't need a high amount of money to deposit first?
Yeah, so that was my part of the presentation. Thank you for that question. First, to cover the topic of the CDs for the certificates of deposit, that is unfortunately part of the game with them, is that the interest rate you receive is almost directly tied to the amount of money that you're putting in initially. So that might not be the strategy for every young investor, but I think it could work for a situation where they receive a large one-time gift, such as I know common considerations are for a 16th birthday or for a high school graduation, something like that, where they're receiving a larger pool of money than they might otherwise. So they have that to put down. In regards to the high yield savings account, there are links to several accounts which only require, maybe $1,000, which, while that's certainly a substantial deposit, it's not so high as to be unattainable for a student who is working part-time. While those interest rates do vary, for the high yield savings accounts, the interest rates are not as tied to the amount of money that you're putting in, and they often grow with the length of the account. So even if you don't get the highest interest rate during that first deposit, if you stay with the same account provider for a quarter, 2 quarters, a year, 2 years, then that interest rate will grow alongside the interest that you are accruing.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I have just one follow-up question, and this is totally personal, which is what I said not to do. But my experience with opening college accounts, because 2 of my children went to college outside of the area, and they've got different banks that are local to them on campus. In order for them to qualify or to open a college account and not have a bunch of fees, the attached savings accounts were not interest bearing, like, period. So have you found that that is a thing? What is the workaround? Do they, just bite the bullet and pay the fees so that you have access to those accounts, or have a, checking account for college and then maybe a savings account somewhere else? Like, I know places like American Express or well, that's the only one I know for sure, but they've got specials on or incentives to open up savings accounts. So what do you recommend in terms of college accounts?
So thank you for that question as well. I think what might be a slightly unfortunate reality in regards to that is that while everyone wants to support, their local bank or the bank that might be the most ease of access for them, some of those larger fees are often tied to more regional banks or banks that might not be as large in the banking world. Whereas banks that are truly national or even transnational oftentimes don't impose fees in that same way. So if you have a child who's going to go to college in a different state or even, studying abroad, using one of those larger banks in order to avoid those fees is something that I would recommend.
Can I
Also,
jump in
just
here?
another. Oh,
Oh,
sorry. Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Lindsay.
Oh, I was just gonna say that like one way I got around this because I went out of state for undergrad. Well, and I'm out of state now. I had a local credit union, and a lot of credit unions are part of a national cooperative where they have low or no fees for banking at other credit unions. And so I could like bank with my hometown credit union in other states.
You know what, thank you for sharing that because that's something that I didn't even remember. I'm sure there's other parents that may not have, well, maybe they're all well adjusted, but I didn't even think about that. But you're right, like most college campuses, there is like a local credit union usually right on campus. So thank you for that reminder, Lindsay. Um, Before I pass it over to Robin, there is one person. Her name is Lisa. She's got a child in middle school at Ballackinwood, and she also works for Vanguard. So she just kind of wanted to chime in off of my question where I mentioned, do you need, to start with a lot of money? So Lisa, I'll let you unmute yourself and share.
Hello?
Hi, Lisa. Well, really, Raymond, I don't know if you want to change your name, but
Well, actually, it was my husband that he chimed into the Zoom. I was just passing by and I was
oh,
listening for a moment. I'm sorry.
that's
I'm very,
okay. Do you want to say something or
yes, I do. I
okay.
work at Vanguard.
Okay.
And so like I said, my husband was listening to you guys. He turned it on for our child that's in middle school here. And I just happened to be listening and I heard you saying something about savings accounts and having to have, or like for the high yield interest rate savings accounts that you have to have a lot of money in the accounts. And I was like, that's not true. I work at Vanguard. We have lots of investment products. You only need $1. You don't have to have a lot of money. We have something called a settlement fund. Like if you were to buy like into mutual funds, well, you can buy ETFs, mutual funds, and stocks. The ETFs, some of them you can go in there, you can purchase, there's no minimum. You can purchase $1 and make, like if I gave you like, some of them make like, or have been making like 20%. Like kids could put their money into what we call a settlement fund and make I think it's at like 4.75 right now. And there's no minimum balance. We have what we call UTMAs. We have a lot of products that are geared towards children. So if anybody is interested in starting their young adults on any like accounts, like Vanguard is an excellent place to start.
Well, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And as part of the ISC, I'm certainly going to write your name down and keep that in mind because that is something that we could, potentially include in terms of, sharing a write up or maybe, contact you about, maybe we do something specifically to savings accounts. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I will definitely be in touch. And I'm going to turn the call over to Robin. Thanks.
Sure.
Hi, guys. We have some questions here. And one of the questions is how do you research the fees associated with either your checking account or savings account? How do you suggest doing that?
Right,
I
so
can go. Oh,
Oh, go ahead, Lindsay. So-
oh, I was just gonna say, like, if you have a bank that you're already at, you can call them up and see what their fees are. If you were to start a new account for your child, a lot of banks have young savings accounts where there's less fees for people starting accounts at a certain like below a certain age. Um, oh, you can also find a lot of them on their webpage.
So I have another question here where it says, when kids are so busy with academically rigorous classes and sports and they're not able to work, how can they still learn financial management skills?
Perhaps some of the fun activities that were listed in the presentation, these can be shared to the parents and the students, so forth. So kind of inculcating the same in the syllabus or in terms of the classes, like allocating 10 minutes in some class would be a good thing, or would be a good way through which students can be informed of it, because they won't be willing to really allocate time outside the school for it. So some activities that can be taken up by the school.
And then the other questions are, if you give a child an allowance, do you recommend it based on work completed, and how do you determine an appropriate age to start that?
Okay, that entirely depends on how the parent wants to kind of like influence and kind of like wants to introduce the financial independence in their child. That would vary from family to family. Perhaps a reasonable age to start doing that would be, I assume, 13 to 14 years, when they're kind of in that age when they are making a sense of how money comes and goes in their household, or if they're seeing other children engage in such activities. Essentially, there could be no right or wrong answer to this. It really depends on how parents want to start and how they want to approach this matter.
And then are there banks that you recommend that are friendly to kids with low balance requirements? I know there was a couple suggestions in there, but were there any others or ones that are particularly?
The one that I know is Bank of America is actually very it's very friendly towards high school students and even college going students, and they have minimal they have very I don't remember the specific, I'm really sorry, but they have really low requirements, as low as like $10 or $15, and they also encourage in terms of they don't have they waive the maintenance fee for students. So that's the thing. You can just walk into one of their offices or one of their stores, and they have huge billboard, huge post signs for it, and they don't want the students to pay fees. So they're kind of really encouraging towards students.
And let's see. How do you recommend using the sites you mentioned, like Rocket Money, for budgeting?
Okay, so once you log in, so you first have to make an account, and then you have to input your income or whatever money you have accumulated, and it's an automatic software kind of a situation where it kind of like calculates. So you input your preferences really, so it's kind of personalized in that manner that whatever you want it to, you know, calculate for you. For example, if you want to follow that 50-30-20 rule or any other rule that you've made up yourself, or just do it automatically how optimum the website deems it as, because the website will be asking you about your goals. So you first need to input your goals. So for starters, you have to make an account and answer a couple of questions about your income and what are your goals.
Okay. And then I have another question about credit cards. In what age would you recommend students start to get a credit card?
I think this is again like it totally depends on like your family and your kid and what you feel comfortable with. But my parents' philosophy was that because credit cards have more protections on them and they felt comfortable that I was like not going to spend unreasonably large amounts of money. I got my first credit card when I was, I think, 13. Um, a lot of my friends didn't get their first credit cards until maybe like 16 to 18. Um, but it's really when you feel like they understand like spending enough that they will be reasonable in their spending habits.
I mean, I got mine at 15, so there's variation.
Yeah.
Whenever the parents trust you enough to not waste money or to be sensible in terms of your expenditure.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was like a trend, kind of like research out there about like timing of it in particular in building your credit, because not all students will, maybe at 18 go off to college, but maybe some students will like be out of the house or trying to purchase cars or other types of things. So I didn't know like how long does it really take to kind of build some kind of credit. And it sounds like credit cards are one of the easiest ways to do that.
I don't know if there was like a clear consensus while I was doing research. I feel like a lot of pages were like teen age in general, which is a pretty big range. Um, I do think like um I guess like your credit builds relatively fast, but I think a bigger like calculation is like your credit score isn't just a factor of when you pay it back. It also considers like how old you are, and that is like just unavoidable. So like just being young like impacts your credit score. So it's kind of like you can help it, but you can't build credit like you would as a adult.
Okay. All right. Okay. I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. Does anybody else, Cicely, Cami, do you have any other questions?
No, just thank you very much. That was very informative.
Yes.
Yep, no, just thank you. Yeah, no, I thought it was fantastic. I'm actually looking forward to my two college students coming home and just casually showing them the replay with my middle schooler. So thank you very much. You guys did a really great job. Anybody else have any questions? You can feel free to submit them directly to me or to Robin in the chat. Okay. Well, it is 8 o'clock. And Robin, is there anything else that we would like to cover? I'm gonna turn off the
Yeah.
recording, or actually, sorry, I can't do that. Robin, if you turn off the recording, I think we're finished with